My eldest son, an airline captain, phoned to ask if my daughter-in-law was at home. "Of course she's here," he whispered, trembling. "Impossible. She just boarded my flight." Then I heard footsteps behind me. That is how it began. I am Ruthan Miller, 60 years old, a widow, once a nurse in New Orleans. My life has been quiet since my husband passed. I live alone in a small house, filled with family memories. Most evenings end the same way, tea on the table, silence in the air. But that November afternoon, the silence was broken. The old landline rang. Its sharp bell echoed through the house. Not the buzz of a cell phone, but the long, piercing ring of a telephone my husband installed years ago. He used to say the old ways were stronger, more dependable. I reached for it, never knowing my world was about to shift. On the line was Raymond, my eldest, a captain trusted with lives across the ocean. His voice was not steady as usual. It shook. "Mom," he asked. Breath uneven, "Is Arlena at home?" I looked toward the kitchen. There she was, my daughter-in-law, standing with a towel in her hands, her hair still damp from a shower. Steam rose behind her. She smiled faintly, unaware of the storm about to break. "Yes," I answered. "She's right here." Silence. Then Raymond whispered again, his voice trembling. "Impossible. She just boarded my flight." She showed her boarding pass. It was scanned into the system. She is seated in first class. The air in my chest collapsed. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "What are you saying? I saw her, Mom." With my own eyes. She walked down the jet bridge. She handed her passport to the gate agent. "It is recorded. She is here on this plane." Behind his words, I heard the muffled roar of engines, the faint announcements of boarding complete. He was telling me the truth. He had no reason to lie. And then I heard it, the sound that will never leave me. Footsteps, slow, heavy, moving across the hallway behind me. My heart pounded once loud in my ears. The towel slipped from Arlena's hand. She looked at me confused. "Who is calling, Mom?" I stood frozen, caught between two impossible realities. She was in my kitchen. She was also on that plane. In 60 years of life, I had learned not to scream. I had buried a husband, raised 3 boys alone, worked night shifts in hospitals where silence could mean life or death. Fear did not rule me. I steadied my voice. "Are you certain?" I whispered to Raymond. "Absolutely." I checked the manifest. Boarding passes do not lie. His tone carried both urgency and fear. "Mum, something is wrong." I looked at Arlena again. Her eyes questioned me, but I gave nothing away. Instead, I placed my free hand on the old leather notebook that lay beside the phone. Its cover was worn, its pages filled with the details of a life lived with discipline. My husband had called it my anchor. Tonight it became my shield. "I believe you," I told Raymond. And I meant it. A mother knows when her child speaks truth. The footsteps grew closer. Each echo pressed against my spine. I told Raymond to focus on flying, not fear. His duty was in the sky. Mine was here in this house, filled with shadows. I set the receiver down gently. My fingers trembled, but my voice remained calm when I turned to Arlena. "Someone is in this house." She frowned, baffled. "That's ridiculous. It's only us." But I knew better. Life had taught me that what seems impossible often hides the deepest truth. 2 questions burned into me that night. Should I trust my instincts honed by age, or dismiss them as illusions of a lonely widow? And when the precision of technology a boarding pass scanned, logged undeniable, clashed with the evidence of my own eyes, which truth should I believe? These were not simple questions. They were battles between faith and doubt, between logic and love. I took a breath, steady and slow. I placed my palm firmly on the leather cover of my notebook and made a silent vow. I would not run. I would not cry. I would observe. That was the promise I gave myself at dusk. I did not yet know that promise would carry me through betrayal, through secrets darker than I imagined, through wounds deeper than grief. But I knew one thing: silence can be power. and I would use mine. The footsteps stopped. The house fell into stillness. My pulse hammered once heavy as stone. And so it began. I sat in my living room after the call, the old phone still humming in my ears. My hands rested on the leather notebook, my chest heavy with questions. To steady myself, I reminded my heart of the people who made me stronger, the family that tied my soul to this earth. I had 3 sons. Raymond, my eldest, was the one who had just called. He was an airline captain, flying the New York to Paris route that week. He was steady and disciplined, a man shaped by years of training in the cockpit. I always said he inherited his father's calm under pressure. That calm was what made his voice breaking on the phone so chilling. Stephen was my second son. He worked as an accountant, quiet and precise, the one who stayed closest to me in New Orleans. He was married to Arlena. Their marriage had seemed strong, though even from the outside I could sense the cracks. He often came home late carrying his laptop like a shield. He would sit at the table with spreadsheets open his eyes, tired while Arlena placed a plate in front of him. Sometimes he barely looked up. I worried that love was being traded for numbers. Darius, my youngest, was still in school studying law. He was my dreamer. His books piled high in his bedroom, his notes scattered across the floor. He wanted to fight for justice, to become the voice for people without one. His presence kept the house alive with the energy of youth, even though I knew he carried his own burdens of doubt. We lived in a working-class neighborhood, the kind where people nodded at one another on the sidewalk, where old brick homes leaned into the weight of history. My house was filled with photographs, worn furniture, and the scent of wood polish that lingered since my husband died. Every corner spoke of years I had survived, years I had given to family. It was here in this house of memories that I began to notice the shadows forming around Arlena. Foreshadowing had always been part of my nurse's instinct. I could see patterns, small details that others ignored. One afternoon I noticed her writing a note with her left hand, though I had always known her to use her right. Another day, she left for the market in a blue blouse, but returned in a red one, the receipt tucked into a different bag than the one she carried out. Little things, but little things build into larger truths. When I mentioned them, Stephen dismissed my concerns. "She probably just switched bags, Mum. You're overthinking." But was I? A mother's eyes rarely lie. That question led me into a deeper conflict. When a family faces doubt, should a son believe his mother or his wife's society leans heavily on loyalty between husband and wife, and I respect that bond. Yet there is also a bond between mother and son that should not be cast aside. I began to feel the tension not only between Arlena and me, but between the roles we women held in this house. The second debate weighed heavier on my heart. Is it fair to label every disagreement as a fight between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law? Or do we reduce women to enemies because society has always been comfortable dividing us? I had seen it during my years in hospitals, mothers pitted against wives, daughters-in-law blamed when families fractured. Was I falling into that same trap? Or was something truly wrong? Stephen's late nights became harder to ignore. His laptop glowed in the dark, his fingers tapping numbers, while Arlena wandered into other rooms. Sometimes she returned smelling faintly of perfume that was not her own. I said nothing, but my heart recorded everything. In those moments of doubt, I sought peace in small rituals. I brewed chamomile tea the way my mother once did, letting the warmth calm my hands. I walked through the hall, lined with wedding photos, my eyes resting on the picture of Stephen's wedding day. Arlena in her gown, Stephen in his suit, their smiles wide, as if they had captured forever in one moment. I told myself to remember that image, to hold on to the hope it once carried. Yet the contrast between that photograph and the reality I was witnessing grew sharper each day. Raymond, during one of his layovers, called me again. His voice was steadier this time, but still concerned. He told me about his flights New York to Paris, back to New York, the long hours of duty. He mentioned how he always checked the manifest himself. Every passenger is accounted for, Mom. Every name has a record. Nothing slips past the system. His words reminded me of the call that started everything, of the impossibility of seeing Arlena in 2 places at once. I carried his words like stones in my pocket, heavy but grounding. That night, I sat in the living room with my notebook open. I wrote simple lines, nothing dramatic. Stephen worked late again. Arlena went to the market blouse, changed colours. Darius asleep by midnight. Raymond called from Paris. Boarding passes are scanned. The act of writing was not just about memory. It was about building a wall of facts to protect me when my own mind doubted. My husband once told me, "Let the paperwork speak when emotions run wild." He was right, so I let the ink carry the truth. In the quiet, I realized healing does not only come after wounds are revealed. Healing can begin in the small acts of caring for oneself. The tea, the notebook, the photographs, they were my medicine, keeping me steady while the storm gathered. As I closed the notebook, I touched the photograph of Stephen's wedding again. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe in the joy it once promised. I let that memory anchor me even as the shadows deepened around us. The next morning began like any other, or so I thought. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, soft stripes falling across the kitchen tiles. The sound of Matthew's laughter filled the room as he chased his toy truck along the floor. Arlena leaned against the counter, humming quietly, while slicing fruit for his school lunch. Her voice carried a tune I recognized instantly. Cielito Lindo, a familiar Latin song one my own grandmother used to sing on warm evenings. It felt almost comforting, but my chest tightened. That melody belonged to memory, to family history. Hearing it now on Arlena's lips unsettled me in ways I could not explain. I did not confront her. Instead, I smiled at Matthew, ruffled his hair, and let the moment pass. Healing, I reminded myself, comes not through accusations, but through patient observation. Still inside, I felt a storm rising. That afternoon, as I stepped onto the porch, I saw my neighbor Mrs. Coleman walking briskly toward me. She had lived 2 doors down for 30 years, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, though never unkind. She waved, then lowered her voice as she drew closer. "Ruthen, I hate to trouble you, but I saw something last night at the Riverfront Hotel." She paused, hesitant. "I thought you should know." My pulse quickened. "What was it?" She glanced around as if the hedges themselves might overhear. "I was having dinner with my sister on the rooftop. You know, the one overlooking the Mississippi. While we waited for dessert, I saw Arlena. She leaned in candlelight, cutting across her smile. He brushed a crumb from her lips. "Ruthen, it wasn't dinner. It was a rehearsal for betrayal." Her words sliced through me. I wanted to dismiss them, to say she must have been mistaken. After all, Arlena had been home with me that evening. I had watched her help Matthew with homework, had heard her humming in the hallway. I forced a smile. "You must be mistaken, Helen. She was here in the house." Mrs. Coleman tilted her head. "I know what I saw. I don't want to stir trouble. But Ruthen, it was her. I'd stake my life on it." She patted my hand, then walked away, leaving me rooted to the spot. My mind spun. How could Arlena be in 2 places at once? I returned inside where the air felt heavy. The sound of the refrigerator hummed against the silence. Arlena was at the sink, rinsing plates, her hair tied neatly back. She turned and smiled. "Dinner was wonderful last night, wasn't it?" Matthew loved the chili. Her words felt rehearsed, almost as if she had prepared them. I nodded, but I could not shake the image Mrs. Coleman had painted Arlena under the lights of the riverfront rooftop, leaning close to another man. That night, after Stephen came home, exhausted from another long day at the firm, I tried to raise my concern gently. "Stephen," I said, pouring tea for him, "I heard something odd today." Mrs. Coleman thought she saw Arlena downtown at the riverfront with another man. Stephen looked up sharply, his eyes narrowing. He closed his laptop, the glow fading from his tired face. "That's ridiculous, Mom. Arlena was here last night. You were here. Matthew was here." Why would Mrs. Coleman say something like that? I hesitated. Maybe she was mistaken, but she seemed certain. He shook his head. "Mum, you've been under stress since Dad passed. Maybe you're reading too much into things. You know people love gossip. I trust my wife." His words cut deeper than I expected. Was I simply an aging widow clinging to shadows? Or was I seeing what others refused to see? It raised the first of many social questions that haunted me. Does a young wife have the right to seek happiness elsewhere when her marriage grows dull, when her husband spends nights buried in spreadsheets instead of love? Or is she bound by vows regardless of her loneliness? And then the second, why does society judge women more harshly than men? When it comes to betrayal, I had seen it in my years as a nurse. Men strayed and people excused it as weakness. Women strayed and they were branded forever. Was I now participating in that same unfair judgment? These questions gnawed at me, pulling me in two directions, toward compassion and toward suspicion. Later that evening, Matthew crawled into my lap with his coloring book. His little voice was cheerful as he pointed at his drawing. "Grandma, look." I drew our house. I smiled, kissed his forehead, and praised his work. My heart softened. Even in the middle of confusion, love for him anchored me. But as he leaned against me, I felt the weight of a secret pressing harder against my chest. Arlena passed through the living room, just then humming again. Yes, the same Cielito Lindo. I studied her face, her posture, the easy grace in her steps. Everything appeared normal. Yet the more normal it looked, the more abnormal it felt. I chose silence. I did not accuse her, not yet. Instead, I wrote in my notebook after Matthew went to bed. Mrs. Coleman claims she saw Arlena at Riverfront Rooftop. Arlena also at home. Conflicting accounts. Keep watching. Writing it down gave me clarity. It separated emotion from fact. My husband's old wisdom rang in my ears. Let the paperwork speak. Still, as I closed the book, I could not ignore the chill crawling down my spine. The first cracks had appeared in the mask, and though I smiled at my grandson, though I forced gentleness into my voice, I knew deep inside this was only the beginning. The night air in New Orleans carried a damp heaviness pressing against the windows of my old house. I sat at the dining table with my leather notebook open, a pen resting between my fingers. For the first time in years, I felt compelled to record every detail of my life. Not emotions, not guesses, facts. I wrote the date carefully, underlining it twice. Then I noted the time, 7:42 p.m. Arlena returned from the market. She wore a red blouse when she left, but came back in green. Receipt from grocery tucked into her bag. Signature does not match previous. I pressed the pen harder than I intended, the ink spreading like spilled truth. I stared at the loops of Arlena's handwriting. They leaned too far left, uneven, unlike the neat script I had seen on her checks. It was a small difference, but I knew enough from years of documenting patients' charts. Handwriting, like vital signs, rarely lies. I whispered to myself, I need facts, not fears. My voice shook, but the words steadied me. The next morning, I brewed tea while Matthew played with his crayons. My oldest friend Carolyn arrived just as the kettle whistled. She had been my neighbor since nursing school, a woman of quick wit and unshakable loyalty. She stepped into the kitchen, brushing rain from her coat, and grinned. Still keeping that old notebook alive, Ruthin, she teased, pointing to the worn leather cover on the table. I poured us both cups. She preferred chicory coffee, strong and dark, the kind New Orleans was known for. I slid the mug toward her, watching as she cradled it in her weathered hands. Her smile faded when she saw the tension on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then opened the notebook to the latest page. She leaned in, reading the entries, her brows knitting. "You're tracking Arlena's movements." Her voice carried concern, not judgment. I nodded. "I don't want to. But something isn't right. One evening she's here with me. The same evening someone swears they saw her across town. The handwriting doesn't match. It's like she's two people at once." Carolyn sipped her coffee, thinking. Then she reached across the table and grasped my hand. Her touch was warm, grounding me. "Ruthin," she said, her voice steady, "if you don't get to the bottom of this, your heart will never rest. You'll live every day, doubting, questioning, fearing. Sometimes the only way to heal is to face the wound." Her words struck deep. She had always been the one to say what I needed, not what I wanted. That afternoon after she left, I sat with the notebook again. My mind returned to two pressing social questions. Was it wrong for a mother to document the actions of her daughter-in-law? Did my role as matriarch give me the right? Or was I crossing into a realm of suspicion and control? And did families have any right to investigate the private lives of their daughters-in-law or sons-in-law? Where was the line between protection and intrusion? I thought of the women I had nursed over the years, mothers who had been silenced, wives who had been blamed, daughters who had been dismissed. Perhaps this was less about intrusion and more about refusing to close my eyes. Later that evening, Stephen returned home late again, clutching his laptop, his tie-loosened exhaustion painted across his face. Arlena greeted him with a quick kiss, setting a plate on the table. They looked to anyone else like an ordinary couple caught in routine. But the notebook on my lap told a different story. I wrote quietly while they spoke. Stephen home at 9:15 p.m. Arlena served dinner already prepared. No explanation for earlier change of clothes. Receipt signed in slanted script. Inconsistency noted. Matthew climbed into my lap, resting his head against my chest. I wrapped my arms around him, grateful for the innocent warmth that reminded me why I was doing this. He giggled as I tickled his side, and I forced myself to laugh with him. Healing comes, I reminded myself through moments of joy, however small. After he drifted off to bed, I sat in the dim light with Carolyn's words echoing in my ears. Face the wound. I traced the leather cover of my notebook, the familiar grooves soothing my trembling fingers. I was no longer just a grieving widow living in the shadows of memory. I was a witness. I was a recorder of truth. The lines between suspicion and certainty were still blurred, but I felt myself stepping into a role I had not held in years, an investigator of the quiet, an observer of the overlooked. I whispered into the silence of the house, I will not accuse. I will not guess. I will watch. And when the time comes, the facts will speak for themselves. I closed the notebook gently, my hand still resting on its cover. For the first time since the phone call from Raymond, I felt steady. Not safe, not relieved, but steady. And in that steadiness, there was a sliver of healing. The afternoon sun pressed down on New Orleans, heavy and relentless. I wrapped my old shawl around my shoulders, its edges frayed from decades of use. It had once belonged to my mother. She wore it on cool mornings when she walked to church. I wore it now as armor, though the day was hot. I told myself I was only going to the market. That was the lie I whispered to steady my nerves. In truth, I was going to follow Arlena. At 3 o'clock sharp, she left the house with her woven basket. Matthew waved from the porch, and she blew him a kiss before walking briskly down the street. I let a small distance grow between us, careful to pause when she paused to step only when her heels clicked forward. The market was crowded alive with the calls of vendors selling okra shrimp and fresh bread. Arlena bought small items too small for the size of the basket she carried. I noticed the handle was wrapped in green cloth, though yesterday it had been red. Another inconsistency. I jotted it quickly in my notebook, basket handle color change. Green today, red yesterday. I kept my head low, pretending to examine tomatoes while watching her every move. She turned abruptly, exiting the market through a side street. My heart raced. She walked faster now, heading toward the old quarter, where houses leaned against each other, their paint peeling their roofs, patched with rusted tin. I followed carefully until she slipped into Alley 14. The air there was cooler, shaded by buildings so close they nearly touched overhead. The walls were mottled with water stains, bricks showing through faded paint. It smelled of damp wood and frying oil from some hidden kitchen. I stopped at the corner, clutching my shawl tighter. Was I protecting my family, or was I violating her privacy? The question burned in me. Did I have the right to shadow my daughter-in-law, or was I simply an old widow prying into lives I didn't understand? Another thought gnawed at me. Poverty can twist even the most innocent. Could desperation drive someone into lies, into playing roles they never wanted? I had seen it before. Patients stealing medicine, mothers borrowing names just to feed their children. Was Arlena caught in such a trap, or was this something darker? I stepped quietly, noting the time on my watch, 3:16 p.m. The narrow alley seemed to stretch forever, yet it ended at a door painted a faded blue. Arlena lifted her hand, knocked twice, and waited. The door opened slowly, and there, standing in the dim light, was a woman who looked exactly like her. I froze. My hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. The woman's hair was longer, darker, pulled into a low braid. Her clothes were plain, worn at the seams. Yet her face, God help me, her face was Arlena's. Same sharp cheekbones, same curve of the mouth. Arlena stepped inside without hesitation. The door closed behind them. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. My mind spun with possibilities. A twin AA trick of my weary eyes. I forced myself to write, 3:18 p.m., alley 14. Arlena entered blue door. Woman identical in appearance opened. Possible twin. Basket observed again, green handle. Environment peeling walls, tin roof above, documented. My pen shook, but the act of writing anchored me. I stood there, leaning against the damp brick heart hammering. I thought of Matthew at home, drawing pictures with his crayons. I thought of Stephen, exhausted, trusting. I thought of Raymond in the sky, certain of what he had seen. I inhaled slowly, letting the breath steady me. My instinct screamed to rush forward, to fling the door open, to demand answers. But another voice, calmer, wiser, held me back. This was not the moment to confront. This was the moment to observe. So I waited. At 6 o'clock sharp, the door opened again. Arlena emerged, her basket now filled with bread and vegetables. She adjusted her blouse, smoothed her hair, and walked away as if nothing unusual had happened. The other woman never appeared. I remained in the shadows, watching until Arlena turned the corner and disappeared. Only then did I write again. 6:02 p.m. Exit observed. Basket filled. No sight of twin. Recorded. I clutched the notebook to my chest. The shawl around my shoulders felt heavier than ever. As I walked home, I whispered to myself the same words I had spoken the night before. I need facts, not fears. Yet deep inside, I knew the facts were beginning to tell a story stranger than any fear I could imagine. That night, as I sat at the table once more, I traced the ink of my notes with trembling fingers. The truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was standing in alley 14, behind a blue door, wearing the face of my daughter-in-law. And the diary of doubts had only just begun to reveal its chapters. The next day, I returned to alley 14. The same blue door waited for me, its paint chipped, the handle rusted. My shawl clung to my shoulders as if it carried the weight of my doubts. I hesitated before knocking, my knuckles trembling against the wood. The door creaked open. The woman who looked like Arlena stood there, her braid resting against her chest. She stared at me with eyes full of exhaustion, then stepped aside. I entered. The smell struck me, first sharp disinfectant, mixed with the dampness of old plaster. The small room held a narrow bed, its sheets threadbare, patched and worn. On the table sat a chipped teapot, steam rising faintly, as if she had been expecting me. I sat down slowly, my gaze never leaving her face. She broke the silence. "My name is Ivelisse," she said. Her voice was softer than Arlena's, trembling at the edges. "I am her sister, her twin." My breath caught. Twin. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. She lowered her head. We were separated at birth. She was adopted by a family who gave her comfort, education, everything. I stayed behind. Poor, sick, invisible. I stared at her, unable to find words. Ivelisse continued, her voice cracking. "Arlena pays me to take her place sometimes, at the house, with Matthew, with you. She says it is only for errands, only when she needs time, but the truth, she uses me to cover her meetings with Charles Whitford." The name sliced through me. I had heard it before, whispered in social circles. A wealthy businessman, known for charm and scandal. Ivelisse's hands twisted in her lap. I didn't want to. But I needed money for medicine, for rent, for food. When you are desperate, you do things you swore you never would. The questions clawed at me. Could deception be forgiven if born of poverty and illness? Could impersonation be excused if survival demanded it? And deeper still, who bore the blame for her suffering? Was it the parents who abandoned one child while cherishing another? Was it society turning a blind eye to the unwanted? She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were scans of passports and boarding passes. One showed the exact boarding time for Arlena on Raymond's flight. The evidence was undeniable. The boarding pass glared with numbers I could not escape. Gate 12, seat 3A, time 1802. Each digit struck like a gavel in an unseen courtroom. Proof that Arlena had boarded while her double stood in my kitchen. I set the folder down my eyes, falling on the chipped teacup on the table. Its crack ran from rim to base, mended once, but still fragile. Without thinking, I lifted it, turning it slowly in my hand. This, I whispered, is us. Broken, patched, but still holding. Evelise looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. I placed the cup gently back on the table, the crack gleaming in the dim light. My voice softened. You are not my enemy. Her eyes widened. Tears spilled, tracing lines down her tired face. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. The sound felt steady, like a heartbeat, reminding us both that time had not yet run out. Evelise covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders folded inward as if the walls pressed closer. She pressed her trembling fingers to her mouth, words leaking through like cracks in plaster. Arlena pulled the strings, and I, like a marionette too hungry for bread, danced. I reached across the table, laying my hand gently on hers. Her skin was cold, trembling. Weakness is not the same as cruelty, I told her. You were forced into this role, but you can choose something else now. Her lips parted, as if hope was a language she had forgotten. We sat there until the steam from the pot faded and the room grew darker. I wrote the time in my notebook, 4:27 p.m. Confirmation from Evelise. Paid to impersonate Arlena. Purpose conceal affair with Charles Whitford. Boarding pass evidence secured. Facts, not fears. And yet the facts pierced sharper than any fear I had imagined. When I finally stood to leave, I looked back at her sitting small on that worn bed, framed by peeling walls and the smell of disinfectant. She was a mirror of the woman who lived in my house, yet her life was a reflection darkened by neglect and abandonment. As I stepped into the fading light of the alley, I felt the notebook heavy in my hand. The truth was uglier than I had wanted, but it was truth nonetheless. And with truth, however painful, comes the first fragile step toward healing. The dining table gleamed beneath a crisp white cloth. I set it with care, my hands steady, though my heart rattled inside my chest. On each plate, I placed a fork and knife, polished until they caught the light. In the center, I arranged a fish roast beside a steaming bowl of chili, both recipes passed down from my mother. The food filled the air with comfort, but tonight, comfort was not the goal. Beside my plate lay my leather notebook. On top of it, I placed the papers Evelise had given me, and finally the crisp boarding pass that Raymond had printed, its ink sharp and undeniable. These were my weapons, not of violence, but of truth. The door opened. Stephen entered first, shoulders slumped from another long day at the accounting office, laptop still slung over his arm. Arlena followed her steps, graceful, her eyes avoiding mine. Matthew ran in behind them, laughter spilling from his lips as he carried his toy plane. Moments later, Raymond arrived, his pilot's uniform, pressed, his face grave. We sat. I looked at each face around the table. Family bound by blood and by trust, yet fractured by secrets. My voice was calm when I began. This table has fed us for years. Tonight it feeds us something sharper than bread, truth. Silence spread like a shadow. Stephen frowned, glancing from me to Arlena. Mum, what's this about? I folded my hands, forcing my tone to remain steady. For weeks, questions have haunted this house. Confusion, whispers, contradictions. I can no longer carry them alone. I reached for the papers and slid them toward the center of the table. Raymond added his own a printed boarding pass. He looked straight at Arlena. "You boarded my flight," he said, his voice sharp, steady. "Seat 3A. I saw you with Charles Whitford. Yet here at the same time, you were in this house. Which version of you is real?" Arlena's face drained of color. Her hand tightened around her napkin until it tore. Her napkin shredded between her fists. "Do you want to see me ruined? Is that what you all want?" Her voice cracked like glass about to shatter. Stephen straightened his eyes, searching hers. "Arlena, tell me it isn't true." Her lips parted, but no words came. The social questions loomed large at that table. Was it right to expose a woman's betrayal so publicly in front of her husband, her child, her family? Did children like Matthew deserve to know the truth, or should innocence be shielded at all costs? Matthew's small voice cut the silence. "Why is everyone angry?" He climbed onto my lap, wrapping his arms around me. His warmth anchored me, reminding me to breathe. I stroked his hair, whispering, "It's all right, baby. It's all right." But it was not all right. Not yet. Arlena's chair scraped back. She stood, her eyes blazing with something between fury and despair. She slammed her fist against the table, fishbones rattling on the plate. "I met Charles. I lied. Because these walls suffocate me. This small life starves me." Stephen recoiled as if struck. His fork clattered to the floor. "You betrayed me. You betrayed all of us." I pressed my palm flat against the table, steadying the storm. "Arlena," I said slowly, each word deliberate, "we do not measure worth by wealth. We measure it by love, by honesty. Those are riches that never fade." Her chest rose and fell in jagged breaths. Raymond slid the boarding pass closer to her. "You cannot deny facts. They are here in black and white. You boarded my flight. You abandoned your truth." Arlena's eyes filled with tears. "You think I wanted this? Evelise was supposed to take care of you. She was supposed to protect Matthew while I—" She broke off, covering her face with her hands. The room fell silent, except for her sobs. Stephen stared at her, betrayal etched into every line of his face. Matthew pressed his cheek against my chest, his toy plane falling forgotten to the floor. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling then exhaling, choosing calm over anger. Healing does not begin with shouting, it begins with clarity. "We cannot change what has been done," I said softly, "but we can choose what comes next." My words did not erase the pain, but they slowed. The current gave us all something to cling to. Arlena's sobs quieted. She lowered her hands, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked at Stephen, then at Matthew, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound came. For the first time, she looked small, fragile, human. We did not eat much that night. The fish roast, cooled the chili, sat untouched. But the truth had been laid bare, more nourishing than any meal could ever be. I wrote later in my notebook, "Dinner of Truths." Boarding pass presented. Betrayal admitted. Family shaken, yet still standing. And as Matthew slept that night, curled against me, his small arms wrapped around my neck, I whispered a prayer into the darkness. Let this house survive the truth. Let it find a way to heal. Her words still echoed through the house. This poor life was never enough for me. Arlena screamed it, her chair crashing backward, her napkin falling to the floor. Then she stormed out the door, slamming so hard that the windows shook. The silence she left behind was heavier than the outburst. Stephen sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Raymond lowered his gaze, jaw tight, while Matthew clutched my sleeve, wide-eyed and trembling. The fish roast lay untouched, the chili congealed, symbols of a family dinner destroyed. For hours the house seemed to breathe grief. Stephen paced, running a hand through his hair, muttering half sentences he never finished. I cleaned the table slowly, letting the motions calm my nerves. The sound of dishes clinking into the sink was the only rhythm steady enough to keep us from collapsing. The next morning, Stephen stood in the doorway of the kitchen, his laptop case hanging from his shoulder. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, I can't keep living like this. I'm filing for divorce." My chest tightened, though I had expected it. "Are you certain?" He nodded, eyes hollow but resolute. "She chose another life. I need to choose one for Matthew and me." We went together to the notary public downtown. The office smelled faintly of paper and ink, the air conditioning humming overhead. Stephen sat across from the notary, his hand shaking slightly, as he signed the petition for divorce. I watched the pen scratch across the page, black ink, sealing the end of vows once spoken with hope. The notary stamped the paper with a heavy thud. I felt the sound reverberate in my bones. When Stephen looked up, his eyes were wet. "Mom, I need you to witness." My hand didn't tremble as I signed. Years of charting as a nurse had trained my writing into something steady, even when my heart quaked. I placed my name on the line, not as mother, but as witness to truth. Back at the house, Matthew sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring a picture of a family with crayons. He drew 3 figures, his father, his grandmother, himself. No mother. When Stephen entered, Matthew looked up. His lip trembled. "Daddy, where's Mummy?" Stephen dropped to his knees, pulling his son close. "Mummy made choices, buddy, but you and I, we will be all right." Matthew clung to him, the green crayon falling from his tiny fingers, rolling across the floor. Then he began to cry, tears spilling fast. His small shoulders shook as sobs filled the room. I gathered him into my arms, rocking him gently, whispering against his ear, "You are safe, always safe with me." His body slowly softened his sobs, easing though the tear stains remained. That night, after Matthew had fallen asleep, Stephen sat beside me at the kitchen table. His face was pale-lined with exhaustion, yet steadier than I had seen in weeks. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Mom," he whispered, voice breaking, "thank you for standing firm. If you hadn't, I don't know where Matthew and I would be." I held his hand tightly, letting silence carry the weight of what words could not. 2 questions echoed in my mind, questions that I knew others would debate. Should infidelity be forgiven the first time, or is betrayal always too deep to mend? Does a child have the right to choose which parent to live with, or must that burden be shielded from such tender shoulders? These were not abstract questions, they lived in our house, pressed against our walls. In the days that followed, the absence of Arlena grew louder than her presence had ever been. Her clothes hung untouched in the closet. Her perfume lingered faintly in the bathroom, mocking us with traces of a woman who had chosen elsewhere. But in her absence, something fragile began to form. Matthew laughed again, cautious at first, then louder, when Stephen chased him through the yard. Stephen worked late, less often, spending more time reading bedtime stories, his voice carrying steadiness into his son's dreams. And me, I returned to my notebook each night. I documented time's events choices, but now I also wrote something new, healing. 3:15 p.m. Stephen and Matthew at the park, laughter heard from across the street. 7:40 p.m. Matthew asleep. Stephen watching quietly, tears of pride in his eyes. I closed the notebook, tracing the leather cover with my fingers. The cracks in our family bond had widened into chasms, but from those fractures, light began to shine through. We were not whole, not yet, but we were surviving. And survival, when nurtured with love and truth, can grow into something stronger than what was lost. The days after Arlena left felt like walking through the ruins of a storm. Our house stood, but the walls carried echoes of betrayal. Stephen buried himself in work and legal paperwork. Raymond flew his international routes, leaving only brief phone calls to check in. That left Matthew and me facing a silence that stretched too far. Then Evelise returned. She arrived one afternoon carrying a small paper bag of groceries, shy but determined. "I want to help," she said softly. "If you'll let me." At first I hesitated. This was the twin sister of the woman who had shattered our family. Could her presence mend? Or would it only deepen the wound? But Matthew spotted her and ran forward, his small arms wrapping around her waist. He smiled, as if he had found something missing. In that moment, I knew sometimes healing chooses its own path. Ivelisse moved into our rhythm gently. She cooked one evening, filling the kitchen with the aroma of fish stew simmering with cilantro. The smell clung to the curtains, warm and familiar, reminding me of Sunday meals when life had felt simple. Matthew ate with enthusiasm, spoon clattering against the bowl, giggling between bites. After dinner, he brought out his school notebook. On one page he had drawn two women side by side, one with Arlena's long hair, the other with Ivelisse's soft smile. Beneath them, he wrote the word, Mom. Stephen froze when he saw it. His jaw tightened, his eyes conflicted. Was it fair for a child to call someone else Mom? Was it healing or betrayal of memory? That question hung heavy in the room. I sat with Matthew stroking his hair. You can love many people, sweetheart. Love doesn't run out. He nodded, content in his innocence. Later that night, I passed by Matthew's room. The light was dim, casting a golden glow. Ivelisse sat on the edge of his bed, singing softly. The melody of Cielito Lindo floated through the air, her voice tender and steady. Matthew's eyelids fluttered until they closed his breathing evening into the calm rhythm of sleep. I leaned against the doorway, tears stinging my eyes. That song, once unsettling when Arlena sang it, now carried a different weight. In Ivelisse's voice, it was not deception, it was comfort. It was healing. The next morning, Stephen found me at the kitchen table with my leather notebook open. He glanced at the blank page, staring up at me. Not writing today, I ran my fingers over the paper. I think it's time for a new chapter, one without shadows. Slowly I closed the book, leaving the page empty. A blank page is not loss, it is invitation. Still questions buzzed like persistent flies. Was it fair for Ivelisse to step into the space her sister abandoned? Did Matthew's innocent use of Mom honor love? Or did it erase the one who betrayed us? These were not easy questions. They would divide opinions if spoken aloud, yet within our home, the answers revealed themselves, not in arguments, but in daily acts of care. When Matthew laughed under the warmth of Ivelisse's attention, I saw proof. When Stephen, still hesitant, allowed her to walk Matthew to school, I saw trust beginning to grow. Healing is not about erasing what hurt, it is about finding what can still bloom in its shadow. Ivelisse herself carried guilt like a cloak. One evening she whispered to me while stirring a pot on the stove, I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to survive. I placed my hand over hers. You are not my enemy. Pain can twist families apart, but it can also give them new roots. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Maybe I can be part of those roots. As days turned into weeks, the house no longer sounded hollow. Laughter returned in fragments, Matthew's jokes, Stephen's cautious chuckles, even my own sighs of relief. The cracks remained, but so did the light. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air smelled of rain, I sat on the porch with my notebook. I opened it, turned to the blank page I had left. Then I closed it again, leaving it untouched. Healing doesn't always need words. Sometimes it simply needs space. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. The truth had torn us apart, yet in its wake, something fragile and real was rising. A bond not built on illusion, but on choice. And choice, I realized, is the purest form of love. The garden smelled of roses and rain. Red blooms lined the wooden fence, tied with ribbons that caught the afternoon light. Chairs were arranged in 2 neat rows, barely 20 of them, facing a small arch dressed in white fabric. It was not a grand wedding. It was not meant to be. It was a promise to begin again. Stephen stood under the arch, wearing a suit that hung loose from recent weight loss. His eyes held scars, but also a new steadiness. Beside him, Ivelisse clutched a small bouquet of daisies. She wore a simple cream dress, Not the kind that pretends to erase the past, but one that honored a future still fragile. Matthew fidgeted with his bow tie, grinning from ear to ear. He carried the rings in a velvet box, his little steps quick with excitement. Raymond stood tall in his airline captain's uniform, a silent pillar steady and strong. His presence felt like an anchor in the storm that had nearly carried us away. As I watched, a question tugged at my chest. Did Arlena, the woman who betrayed us, deserve forgiveness if she ever returned? Some in the crowd would say yes, love. After all is imperfect. Others would say no, trust. Once broken, cannot be rebuilt. The truth is not simple. Forgiveness is not a right. It is a choice. And sometimes the bravest choice is to walk away and never look back. Another question lingered like a shadow. Should Matthew know the full truth of his mother's betrayal when he grows older, or should childhood be a place where innocence is protected? I could not decide. Society itself wrestles with this. What children deserve to know, and when, remains one of the hardest debates a family can face. The ceremony began with a prayer for strength and resilience. No long speeches, no elaborate rituals. Just two people speaking vows, not of perfection, but of honesty. Stephen's voice cracked when he said, "I will not promise a life without storms, but I will promise to stand firm when they come." Evelise answered through tears, "I cannot undo the choices of the past, but I can choose loyalty and love from this day forward." Matthew slipped the rings into their hands with solemn pride, though his grin gave him away. When the vows were sealed, the guests clapped softly. 20 voices, but the sound filled the garden like a chorus. The reception was simple tables set with white cloth bowls of chili plates of roasted fish and pitchers of sweet tea. The food was not chosen for show. It was chosen for memory, for continuity. It tasted of endurance, of survival. I sat at the edge of it, all sipping chamomile tea from a porcelain cup. My body finally rested, my heart loosened. Around me, laughter rang out. Matthew's giggles mixed with the deeper voices of his father and uncle. Evelise's voice floated nearby, warm and steady. For months I had lived inside suspicion, inside the heaviness of secrets. Now, in this small garden, the truth stood naked. It was imperfect, it was scarred, but it was ours, and it gave us something stronger than illusion healing, and the quiet strength to continue. I watched Matthew run across the yard with his cousins, his bow tie crooked, his shoes muddy. He was a child again, free of the fear that had once clouded his sleep. Evelisa bent to fix his hair, laughing when he wriggled away. Stephen looked on, no longer broken, but softened. The sky deepened to twilight, the air heavy with summer crickets. Guests trickled away, leaving echoes of blessing. Raymond hugged me tightly before returning to his duty in the skies. Stephen lingered, his hand squeezing mine. "Mom," he said quietly, "we survived." When the house was quiet again, I sat on the porch. The wooden boards creaked under my chair, the garden still carrying the smell of roses. I lifted my cup of chamomile tea, steam rising in the cool night air. Inside, laughter still echoed Stephen's low voice, Matthew's bright giggles, Evelise's tender hum. I closed my eyes. Betrayal had tried to destroy us. Secrets had tested us. But the truth, harsh and unyielding, had given us back something stronger. In the end, healing does not roar. It does not demand attention. It settles quietly, like the strength of roots under the earth. My voice steady belongs to that truth. The truth did not return what was lost. It gave us something rarer, roots that hold even after the storm. And with that, the story found its close. Not in revenge, not in endless grief, but in the quiet beginning of a life rebuilt. And that is how truth, though painful, gave my family back something stronger. Healing. Quiet strength. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my place, would you stay silent or seek the truth? Tell me in the comments and let us know where in the world you are listening from. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to begin again. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it means the world to me.